video. So I've said that I think that you actually cannot grasp the scope of the higher dimensions of a book, a film, a skill, a talent, anything without quite voluminous, a lot of repetition. And I went over the film Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, also the film Casino, but also the film Tiger, Hidden Dragon, probably equally those two films, quite a lot over a period of about 3 years while I was very obscure. And I was only being contacted by a friend from childhood who loved me and was successful in life, but would check up on me a lot at that time when I was an obscure adult. But I still needed the friendship and some of the mercies of childhood in those first years, that I had a grace of that friend checking in on me like that. But I was watching those movies a lot, Casino and Crouching Tiger, and I think that I actually misquoted it in that last video that I ended up with. It sounded like I knew what I was talking about, but I actually was unconscious in that moment. And what I had said, when I said the dud out like that, I think that refers to enlightenment, and that's what he said at the beginning of the film when he was. I watched that film many more times in Mandarin than with captions, because the captions were distractions and somewhat profane in the beauty of that language and that in the scenes of that film. But I was familiar with the captions to know what was being expressed a lot in the film. And so when he was starting out, I think he had approached what's called nirvana or enlightenment, and he conveyed it as that, and that some he said the thou like that. I think that means enlightenment. But then he said right behind that, he flinched at darkness, and you can see him. He can see him contemplating darkness. The actor Chow Yun Fat that played Lee Mumbai, and that the actual darkness, he was addressing it in his face. The coldest thing is when you don't know the coldest thing is in your face. So that what could be dark enough to bring you back from the precipice, the point of entering nirvana, Maha great nirvana, Satori, enlightenment, the Dada, would be love. Love is the only thing dark enough to bring you back from that. And the least likely thing to succeed at, and he did not succeed at that. He succeeded in dying in the arms of his love interest, but he didn't get to become nothing with her and get his rocks off like he might have liked to, and he didn't get to live and die and suffer and enjoy with her, and he didn't get to have something that looked like her, that was animated with his spirit, to go on behind him, which would have been a blessing greater than life and death, a blessing greater than God, I'd say. A blessing greater than Chigana would be to have something that looked like someone you love, that is animated with your love for that person, to go behind you. That would have been the greatest outcome, and yet the least likely outcome, and yet the most compelling outcome, and the most inevitable outcome would be to fail at that. Yet there is no rule without an exception, so there is that exception, that possibility of what if there were love? What if I were about to enter nirvana, but there had been love that is yet viable, that remembers me? Would I turn away from nirvana? Would I risk never reaching nirvana? Would I risk dying without issue? With nirvana, I'd probably die without issue, but it might not actually be death. Would you risk eternal life for a chance at love? And then that's probably what the different animals ask themselves before they buck up and go to compete for mating. It's been said that human beings are a mating species, and part of our relish and experience of love making and fornicate. Maybe all love making is fornicating, whether or not we took any kind of vows, and it's maybe more so enjoyable as fornication if we're being honest, and that's yet enjoyable also as a feature of competition. And you can't have the opportunity to live without the opportunity to die. So when you get enough gall, it's been said that I had gall before by eminent people, but I don't think they meant well with that. But I still think gall is good. If you had enough gall to buck up and take a chance at love, you might lose what's left of your life in this world that could have otherwise been peaceful and tame and healthy and maybe a little bit enjoyable, but it would have yet been haunted by the potential, by the viability, by the possibility of love. And that's what he experienced at the precipice of the Dada. And he came back to take a chance at love, to roll the dice at love. And he rolled snake eyes, but he did yet die in the arms of his lover, his love interest. and he did actually shelter a promising disciple and give her a real shot at love and at life by his effort to disavow the bloodshed of a sword that he was associated with, and make right by that sword and make right by that person he loved. But he failed at that, and maybe he won at that because he failed at that. So maybe to fail at love is to win at love, and maybe to win at love is to fail at love, if we want to talk deep. But then, so I didn't want to misquote him, but what he did say, what was cold, is that I still think that. So what I meant to say is that a lot of things are, I think all things are rhythm, including rhythm, so much so that there's what could be called multiple rhythm, but I still think number is arbitrary. But there's nothing limited. So rhythm is therefore unlimited. So it therefore involves timing, which is dynamics within rhythm. And so we have rhythm and timing. We have rhythm, expectation, and improvisation. The expectation is not possible without the potential of improvisation and upsetting of rhythm. And the upsetting of rhythm and improvisation is not viable without the expectation of rhythm. But I still think that it doesn't have to be linear to be rhythm. And the more so alinear the rhythm also is, also the more compelling the piece is. But it's similar with improvising in environments, like with banter and humor and wit. Like some of these people make available for me in these dry environments, and I make available for myself, and I could be appreciated as equally dry in their experience. But it's viable with our unconsciousness makes possible our conscious maneuvers. That's possible. That's viable for us, and then also people we're dealing with. And then so as the great Lee Mubai has this scene where he's courting a disciple that is promising, and she's giving him a hard time, like, so she tells him, keep your you're sounding like a monk, keep your lessons to yourself. That's the exact same thing I hear every time I try to upload anything that I think is worthwhile, whether verbal form, whether musical form, or whether written form online. People online have nothing but time on their hands and ones and zeros in their face. But if you call yourself having something to say, where you use more of these unlimited ones and zeros than you're afforded by your stature in another person's perception, they write you off and dismiss you the same way that disciple did in that film that he's actually trying to court and share his experience with. Where you could say he's wrong for trying to share his experience with her when she wasn't looking for that, or she wasn't inspired by that. You could say he's wrong for that. You could say he's as wrong as courting the love interest who was yet promised to his failed comrade, because that was also featured in that film. So you could say he's not a true master for either of those two things, and I couldn't contend with that. But it is true that he could demonstrate a degree of value, but it's actually one of the darker, I think maybe the darker part of that whole movie, Caution Tiger Hidden Dragon, even darker than the tutor of the misguided disciple, because she's yet congruent and she's actually kind of cold. She didn't have anything to say to anyone except the disciple, and the disciple was more so attached to her and bonded with her, and they looked kind of dynamic together when they were up to mischief together, and they effed over a police officer together. They actually looked like a real happy pair there. So maybe Mubai was wrong to interfere with that, even as well-meaning as he was, and he's more so disingenuous even than the villain for contending with the honor of his comrade in approaching his fiance, and then also courting a disciple who wanted nothing to do with him. But you could say he did so out of love. So all is fair in love and war, all is good in love, and all is beautiful in love as it doesn't hurt someone or limit someone. So you can't say who's right or wrong in anything, even in fiction, even in allegory. Is the villain right, or the antagonist or the protagonist right or wrong? You could appreciate that on either and both and none of those sides. But so one of the darker parts of that, even darker than him dying in the arms of his lover without issue, and dying in the so even him dying without realizing love, what's darker than that is the actual training that could have benefited this disciple in her interest in the sword. So he's conveying the true experience that is commensurate and reciprocal with the fashioning and intention of that sword, as being a profound way to manipulate the sword, so much so that he can demonstrate that by engaging with her using the sword in that scene. And he picks up a stick and he parries her motions with the sword, which are yet unconscious to a degree, as he can demonstrate, because of how he can overcome her with the stick. And then he gives her what would be a mock, that is a practice coup de grace, where I think a coup d'état is a death move, or a final move, a check move in like a political theater, a military theater. But a coup de grace is a death blow in also a military theater, political theater, or a combat of some kind. A coup de, I got that from my younger brother. A coup de grace is a death blow, a checkmate blow, and he gave her a coup de grace with a stick, having parried her motions with an actual the greatest of swords. She had the greatest of swords in her hand, and he had a stick, and he parried her to the point of artfully and playfully giving her a coup de grace, which would show his real competence with that sword. But you could yet say that he was wrong for approaching her with his own reciprocity with the sword that she had coveted. That is an efficient means of engaging with that sword. You could say that he was wrong for approaching her that way, and that maybe if she appreciated the sword differently, and she was able to get over on other people, as she did in some of the scenes of that film with that sword, you could say that she was developing her own style, and potentially her own style could meet and or surpass his own style if she had enough practice with that sword. Because you do anything consistently and you're now practicing, and your practice is not the same as anyone else, neither is your potential, neither is your outcome if you are practicing engaging with it, because you are creative. I think there's nothing more creative than repetition. Einstein has said that repetition, expecting a different result, is insanity, and I say he is correct. Yet he is asinine, as is all people who write off, if he does write people off for being insane, as being futile or useless, because I don't think anything cool or efficient or useful ever got done without a degree of insanity. And our greater thinkers had been tinkerers, according to Nicholas Taleb, is that the greater discoveries were not discoveries in themselves because people were that creative or that insightful or that thoughtful in themselves. It was more so tinkering. The creativity to be discovered within tinkering. Minor adjustments within perpetual repetition is what tinkering is, and is what is brilliance, and is what is discovery, and is what is creativity, and is what is free association, pure and simple. I think if it's effective, and you don't get there without repeating stuff a lot. So I actually can't convey some of my experiences of the film Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon without a lot of repetition. Not to call myself a master or a maestro or a buff, but just simply someone that enjoyed it enough to repeat it a lot, and gain a little bit of insight and articulate and enunciate thought based on that. It takes a lot of repetition to get there, and the more so mundane and repetitive, but also the minor adjustments, is what the real creativity is. And I have this musical content on this channel that has been fashioned out of a lot of repetition. Last summer, I couldn't play hardly a lick of anything, and I had a little etude that's like a practice training from a maestro in my area. That was that fingering that he gave me for that. It was dynamic enough that I began to do more complex fingering based on my own inspiration and discovery, based on repetition of that lick and etude, and it became like 30 and 35 minutes of both rhythmic and improvised material, repeated and improvised material, a combination of that is outside of what would be traditional approaches to Western tonality. That means making music harmonious by abiding within a key. And I cast that out with the stronger approach of simple repetition and what would sound and feel good. And I think it's a little bit more it's more sonorous. That means like that's another word for harmonious. It's more consonant, it's assonant and sonorous by as a function of repetition and enjoyment and coordination and spontaneity within all that by repetition and tinkering beyond what could be approached in a arbitrary there that is linear, that is straightforward application of what's appreciated as a tonal a harmony and abiding within the key. Some people could contend with that, and I don't contend with that. I stand down from contending, but in my experience, the repetition is what's more valuable and impactful than than discussions of preconceived harmony standards that are agreed upon. Generally speaking, I'm not saying stuff can't sound cool like that, but I'm saying that as cool as you sound within a key, it's yet also limited because our mind is all existence, and our mind can hear the limitations as soon as you approach something in a preconceived fashion that is canned, that is linear, that is thought beforehand. You're somewhat limited, and our mind can hear that. In a lot of songs peter out in 3, 4, and 5 minutes. But when you simply approach it based on enjoyment, repetition, and tinkering, I think you get further along. But I just wanted to say that part of when we engage with people, like with banter, but then also like what Mumbai did in that film, the darker part of that film is just that she wanted nothing to do with his training. That's the deeper. That's the death. That is death right there. I think when the young are not inspired by the season, where you could maybe say that maybe she wasn't inspired on the back of her mind because she recognized that his master, who's called Southern Crane, was portrayed from the perspective of the villain as being a womanizer and trying to get over on her, because the real disciple might have actually been the villainess, Jade Fox, because she was approaching masters who were more so male dominant and chauvinistic as her side of the story would convey. For whatever the reasons for that were. There's also a point in the film where Mumbai does get her to go off to the monastery that he'd been trained at, and he said usually they don't accept women, but they might make an exception for you. He said that might actually show the chauvinism that the original disciple that wanted to be a disciple to the point of stealing a manual, Jade Fox, had actually been, and then she may have actually been affronted and womanized and accosted as a prostitute. That's what you can appreciate witnessing that movie enough from her standpoint, and that might actually be the deeper crime. So the bigger low life of that film, according to Jade Fox, if her testimony is correct, which she died for her testimony, and she also was passionate about her testimony, and she was congruent to her standpoint, more so congruent than the protagonist Mumbai, and potentially more so congruent than his master, Southern Crane, if he had actually approached Jade Fox as a womanizer and to make a prostitute of her when she was interested in learning for the sake of learning and actually undergoing the training. That's how she presents herself as, because she's yet preoccupied and impressed with training in itself, even as she's an effective villainess, slick enough to infiltrate a royal family and court and tutor the prize, one of the prize and promising daughters of a governor. She manages to do that and convey her value and also her training to that disciple without having a sexual overtone or interest in that disciple as the film portrays. But the film does portray that the Mumbai, the protagonist, he has an interest in both. He has an interest in his love interest in the film, the recognized love interest, who had been the fiance of his brother who fell in arms, and then he also courts the disciple in somewhat of a seductive manner, which could convey sexual overtones. So you could say that he was bogus for that, and also his master, Southern Crane, who is a subtle hint to that master, is also somewhat bogus for that. And then maybe I'd go so far as to say that all of life, all people are essentially degenerates. Even these masters even these people we appreciate as masters, whatever they did of austerity, that's not what their first mind had been. That's not what their instincts had been. If they could get away with it, they would have had their cake and eat it too. They would have had their sex and their enlightenment too, as Mumbai attempted to do in this film, because he stepped back from enlightenment. But you appreciate that maybe he wants to get back to that enlightenment by the way he talked about it, because he didn't say enlightenment ain't nothing, or I'd rather be a dirty degenerate than enlightened. He didn't say that, but he more so attempted that. Where of course love is better as degenerate. So I'm not saying that he didn't love her, or that he didn't love her, but he wanted to approach her outside of honor, and that was somewhat degenerate. And if he would have got to enjoy her, it would have been funner as degenerates, if we're being honest, in the deepest sense. But so maybe he was bogus for all that, and that's what the younger disciple could appreciate, and that's what she wanted nothing to do with, and that's what her instinct was, and that is what the real darkness of the film was. But also the fact that his training didn't get passed on. Maybe you could say it didn't get passed on because he wasn't righteous, nor was his master the subtle figure in that film that's barely referenced and mentioned, but is yet a figure in a plot character, a peripheral plot. That's actually maybe great story writing, is to have a plot character that never appears, that verbatim, that you can recognize. I think he might have appeared in that film, the essence of what he embodied, the great Southern Crane. They didn't call him great, but just Southern Crane. Maybe he's more great by taking off great and just calling him Southern Crane. But I think someone that could be that cold and that disciplined and that mean appears in that film. But I won't give more of a Easter egg than that. But you could say that maybe both those masters were bogus, and the ones that weren't bogus had been the villainess, who was yet interested in training for the sake of training, and also mentoring for the sake of mentoring, whether or not her values were appreciated by what's called righteous, which had also proven itself to be degenerate in the film. And then also the disciple that wanted nothing to do with maybe what could be inferred by female instinct as a degenerate master, and an understudy of a master who was discovered to be degenerate by the disciple's a villainous tutor, who slayed the master Southern Crane and confiscated his manual, but couldn't completely appreciate it on the terms of that master and the text that appeared with it. But in the scene where Mumbai is courting her and giving her a lesson based on her own shortcomings, but that she actually didn't entirely want. He's interfacing. He's making spontaneity within the what can be expected of her. So he showed up somewhere when she was having a conflict of conscience to return a sword. He had anticipated that in fiction, and that might be the license of fiction, that you could actually have prescience to predict what someone's going to do. That's a little bit of that. I think even our greatest fiction and allegory, it has some stuff that is just preposterous, and but also life can be more preposterous than preposterous. So that's not entirely outside of life, but it just goes to show that he's interfacing with her, and she's predictable to him, and also somewhat unconscious while thinking herself conscious, which would allow him to predict her movements, parry her movements, best her movements, like what he did with the stick, but also the improvising upon her statements. But there's one part, whether or not he's right or wrong, or whether she's right or wrong, I can't say that. But I just know that we saw death in that film, because we saw love come up short. We saw a lot of suffering. Suffering is alluded to with that sword and the bloodshed that it's attended by. And then we also saw him fail to convey an awesome, what's appreciated to be an awesome heritage and training and skill but it also what's betrayed, whether it was intended by the director or not, because the reality is always going to show, is that maybe we can say that martial arts, or maybe even different forms of monks and faith and leadership, spiritual leadership. I'm taking license with this, but we can say spiritual leadership, martial arts leadership, spiritual training, martial arts training. All that it involves a lot of discipline, sacrifice, teaching, initiation, oversight, undersight, like being having integrity when you're not being observed, as though you were being observed, and then also honor, but also life and death, and also consequence to be suffered by others. When we have entitlement, we therefore have privilege. We therefore have advantage. We therefore have enjoyment, and there's no enjoyment without suffering. So if we're enjoying, someone is suffering somehow, some way. The author Arthur Avon has said that for the tiger to sustain itself in its cub with the flesh of the deer, what is death and misfortune and fate for a deer is yet opportunity, life, bounty, health, healing, and joy for the tiger and or its cubs. So it's balanced like that. But so in that film you have pain, turmoil, sadness, death, and the failure of a lineage, and both a personal lineage of a lover, that Mubai, and his failed comrade, and his love interest, who didn't get to enjoy love with either of them, but she may have been traumatized by the death of her fiance, and also the approach of his friend, for being honest, and then also the disciple and the villainess also lost her life in the exchange, and she didn't get to realize the training that she had took risks for it, and was willing to kill and be killed over, and to teach over. She had lost all that also, which is tragic on a level. And then the disciple lost the opportunity to be herself. She did yet survive, but she was slated as not being happy with a bad guy lover, or a auspicious lover that her family wanted for her. She didn't appear to be happy with any of that. The only thing she ever appeared to be happy doing was stealing and effing over to the point of killing a police officer, in tandem with her villainess, who she once believed in and believed in her, and they actually really looked to be something of a fitting pair together. They looked more so in their element, and more so life affirmative when they were being bad. Those two, way more than when they were being courted by righteousness. Even as they're floating over the waterfall in some of the scenic films, there is beauty in the waterfall, where there's a darkness. So you have the darkness of the disciple not wanting anything to do with training, yet the training wanting something to do with her, and the possessor of the training wanting something to do with her. That is yet deep, and that is beautiful, and that is contrast, because contrast is beautiful. But it is yet tragic. But all I meant to say is that a lot of life is a rhythm, and then timing within rhythm, which is timing, which is also rhythm, which is spontaneity, which is music. Music is rhythm. Rhythm is music. Music is rhythm in itself. And then creativity is also a function of rhythm. Repetition and tinkering within repetition would be spontaneity, and both those give you insanity, and therefore creativity and viability. And then also so that you have all that, and then but for better or worse, life or death, there was a really cool moment in that film, and I wanted to properly quote that as being maybe a resolution to the blood of the sword that Mubai couldn't get away from, and we can't get away from to this day, because that sword is called Green Destiny, and it is destiny in the hands of what's presented as a righteous master, which may be righteous, and master may also be oxymoronic statement, because mastery it necessitates truth and dynamics, and you need light, death, light, dark, and indifferent to be real and viable. And because reality is light, dark, and indifferent, and you can't achieve reality. Chitgana, massive consciousness. I don't mean to associate. I walk that back. I recant that. I don't mean to utter that name in association with anything light or dark or indifferent, but just that reality is all of that. And you're not truly a master. You're not truly yourself until you're all this reality, because this reality is you, and this reality is good, bad, and indifferent, light, dark, and indifferent. So you maybe can't be righteous. Righteous would be more so decidedly affirmative, life affirmative, positive, as we're presented. Mastery in the best of terms, I think. Or if mastery is dark, it's completely dark, and it's profound for being dark. But you more so aren't presented with the concept of an indifferent master. Maybe we haven't seen pure indifference, mastery within indifference. We've seen light, masters of light, and we've seen masters of dark, but we haven't seen masters of light and dark that would be indifferent. That might be more potent, and there might be more potential there. But yet that confounds the statement again of righteous and master, because if you had been a master, maybe according to what I'm learning from myself making this video, you might be, if you were the deepest, most potent, most viable, most dynamic, most contrasting, that is beautiful master. And beautiful is again arbitrary, because that's decided, and nothing is decided, nothing is defined, therefore nothing is beautiful or ugly. But the more so closer past at mastery in the greatest sense is, like I said with the beginning of the series, is like the wind, and is indifferent. The wind is a lot more so indifferent. It has a lot to do with you, and it has a lot not to do with you, is what the wind is. And it's indifferent in that, but it's also beauty in the timing and spontaneous. That my hair will never look like exactly like this. My lace fronts will never look exactly like this, and my real hair will never look exactly like this. And as the wind hits me, at a I'm not saying I'm blowing wind where I'm at, but if the wind hits me, it's so spontaneous, and once upon a time in dynamic in that moment, is that the wind will never pass through someone's hair that exact way to give that exact look in that exact moment of life and death as we're at right now. And that's what's so beautiful, fleeting, spontaneous, yet profound and deathless as the wind, and as us in the wind, Gone with the Wind. That was a better film. Maybe all titles that have ever existed, all relationships, all bonds that have existed, all potential that has existed, all names that have existed, would be better just called Gone with the Wind. I said in another video that there were so many weapons in the 90s that you could have just had a movie called Gun, and it's nothing but a gun. But I think you could have called that movie, and each rom-com, each action film, each documentary, each science movie, each educational movie, each history movie, you could have called all that, and the people watching it, and their given names, and their nicknames, and their street names, and their alias, and their handle, and their pseudonym, and their maiden name, and their given name, and their changed name, and their secret name, and their code name, and their code name, and their call sign. You could have called all that Gone with the Wind, and you wouldn't have been lying, because that's what it was about to be before it had came into existence. That's what it more or less was at its best while it existed, if it didn't get to exist. And then when it did get through existing, which is maybe a greater degree of existing, it had been gone with the wind that whole point. So we're gone with the wind, and in this film with Mumbai, the beautiful thing, the redeeming thing, is that life is whatever the hell it is, and he's what he is, good and bad, and his disciple is what she is, good and bad, and her tutor is what she is, good and bad, and her love interest, good and bad, and the honest cops in that movie are what they are, and the security guards are what they are, and the Easter eggs are what they are, and the victims are what they are, and the extras are what they are, and the art masters or the patrons are what they are, and the wise men are what they are in that film. All the things are what they are in that film. But what is beauty within all that is the contrast and the doper thing that Mumbai said, and I think that they call that the green destiny. And I think in the best of hands, something as proper and exact and lethal, it as a sword, no less than the greatest crafted sword known to exist at that point, the green destiny, is destiny in the hands of in the best of hands, and it is fate and destiny, but more so fate in the worst of hands, which are not necessarily different than the best of hands in ultimate terms. But the same is our actual weapons to this point, is that you can say that all the weapons that exist right now, that are about us right now, that are planned for us right now, are actually fate, and they're actually destiny. You could say that these different weapons are an expression of destiny, the darkest blunt aspect of destiny. And you can maybe almost say that it's mercy, because if you think about how horrible it would be to die at a weapon, and we now see men, women, children, boys, girls, elderly, young, old, babies, righteous, unrighteous, good, bad, cops, patriots, rebels, soldiers, rebels, scientists, business people, government people. You see every manner of person occasionally, yet frequently, meeting a heinous, regrettable, daunting, unimaginable fate at the hands of different weapons. But we can say the mercy about that is that some of it appears to be rapid, because these weapons are so rapid that you simply don't exist before you had a second thought to be none the wiser. And that might actually be yet a form of mercy, because this reality is redeeming and it is characterized by mercy. So even as we meet heinous and as we understand untimely demise, fates, destiny, it is somewhat rapid sometimes in the best of terms. But it had been destiny. And so maybe when you're presented or a weapon appears of some kind, and I've said that a weapon can be or look like anything, it is yet an expression of both destiny first, as we have enough wiggle room to make right decisions, timely decisions, and then it becomes fate at a certain point. And even the best maneuvers of destiny that afford us mercy and grace, it will still amount to fate at a certain point, because our fate is imminent in this life. It is mitigated. It can be mitigated and suspended, postponed, or hastened, but it cannot be avoided and is imminent. So the green destiny is the green destiny in that film, and is rightly so called. But so are the very weapons about us. And sometimes the more humble weapon, the more unassuming weapon, in the wrong hands or the right hands, as that is arbitrary, can be the more lethal thing. And I've said in another form that sometimes you see like military caches, and there's an elegance and discipline in regimented, organized military weaponry when it's not being employed, and it's disciplined and chaste, and you think it belongs to righteous people. There's a certain beauty and elegance in that. You see a weapon of recovered and retrieved ordinary, maybe cheap weapons that have actually been employed, maybe with ingenuity or cunning by what's appreciated as a bad actor, and that looks horrifying and terrible. But it's yet destiny, the same as the most righteous of weapon, because a weapon is a weapon. It's destiny first, as we have anything as we have choices to make, and mercies and grace. It's destiny at that point, but it does become fate at one point. And maybe you could say that all who have existed, all who have breathed, have the same fate. How they meet that fate might be a function of the things that they say, do, and think. And there may be mercy within that, and grace within that, but yet all had the same fate, which is to breathe, is to not breathe one day. And I think that goes for everyone, but that actually might be the cause of us yet breathing again once. But all Mumbai said in that film, to quote him properly, while he's improvising on her unconsciousness as it's presented, is that he said, I am nothing, the sword is nothing, it is all a state of mind. And I think that might be the solution to our dilemma and our destiny in our life. and these weapons that are about us, and these trifling ways of all of us, those record us, and those record is that he said Ninu Limu Bai Shushumi Hahai Shushumi the Ishim the Choyu